Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a good evening. There is something I'm going to have to say first before I cover anything else, and that is the film starts in 5 minutes. If you are new to this channel, if you're watching on catch up, this is going to start in 5 minutes. Okay, I'm having a 5-minute preamble before we start the commentary on Pet Sematary, the original, of course. And that's to give people a chance to come in, a chance to make sure that they've got their copy ready. And all that business and catch up for how this is going to work. So just 5 minutes preamble. If you don't want to hear me rambling, if you want to get straight to the discussion of Mary Lambert's directed version of Pet Sematary, then skip to 5 minutes. Obviously, you can't do that right now, but you in the future on the replay will be able to do it. There will probably be a chapter mark to enable that. For everyone else, hey, thank you for joining me. This is something of an experiment. I am hoping it works. It's something I've been quite interested in. And when a channel member suggested covering Pet Sematary, I was extremely happy to. This is a bit of a guilty pleasure of mine. It's one of the earliest films I looked at. Well, one of the earliest films I looked at was the remake. And I've never really given the original much attention, which I'm hoping to make up for tonight. So just to say how it's going to work, I've got it in the description of this video, but I'll just say it now before we start. And again, I will state at 5 minutes, we're going to start the film. If I were to play Pet Sematary, I would get nuked. YouTube would not allow it, even though this would be entirely transformative. So what I have is a copy of the film, a legally purchased copy of Pet Sematary, and I am going to play it with the sound down low. I'm going to talk over it just like a DVD commentary, except I'll spend considerably less time sort of talking about interesting meetings with famous producers, which seems to take up about 10% of all commentaries. Just to randomly fill a minute, the Scream 2022 commentary, they talk over all the interesting stuff in the opening scene, the first kill, something that's meant to really set the tone for the whole movie and basically relaunch the franchise. And they talk about meetings that they had, and it's like 5 guys who are all just talking about meeting producers. It's drove me mad. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and give you an informative commentary and in my own inimicable style. So insightful readings, facts, blatant lies and slander about various people involved in it. You know, that's how I do. So we have an important question here. Will there be a gay reading? No, I'm going to do a reading of it. I think there is a really important interpretation of Pet Sematary. I think there is a very deep meaning, a very special meaning in this film. And I'm going to try and unpick it, but I'm afraid it's not the usual one that I present to you here. So I hope you all have your copy ready. My version is 102 minutes long. So kind of mid-range. I think the remake is about the same, but even though it's the same source material, roughly the same length, my goodness, they are extremely different. I will be touching on that in some parts, but I don't want it to be a direct comparison all the way through. I want to really focus on just what was done in the original Pet Sematary. I also, I am obviously doing this solo. Hopefully it's just me talking the whole way through, not having any technical issues. If I do end up dropping out as I did on Thursday, hang around, I'll restart and I should be back in and it shouldn't be too difficult. Okay, we've got about 30 seconds to go. So I'll get ready to knock the preamble sign off. And I should also say, because I'll be doing a live commentary, I've got some notes to work off. I'm not going to be able to engage in the chat as much. So I'm just going to hope you like it. If you want to leave your scores in the traditional way at the end, I might try and get to them during the credits, but I've got to focus on the film. So we're going to start now. Okay, everyone, this is a audio commentary for Pet Sematary from 1989, one of the relatively early adaptations of a Stephen King work. Although, interestingly, not produced by Castle Rock. That's something I always expect to see from a Stephen King movie. It's something you're going to be obviously very familiar with if you've seen this. This is an adaptation of the 1983 novel. So a relatively early work for Stephen King, and something that holds quite a special place in his heart, I think. We'll cover that later. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what I think is the real meaning behind Pet Sematary, why Stephen King calls it the scariest book that he's written, why he considered not even publishing it, interestingly enough. Just like Carrie, he wasn't going to publish it, and luckily his wife Tabitha convinced him to publish it, except for Carrie, he didn't think it was a quality story. For Pet Sematary, he just had some reservations, thought he'd gone too far. And I've got an interesting take on why that is. But just in this opening scene, you've probably just seen a skunk go by, a perhaps unnecessary detail, but one I appreciate. And you've just seen the credit there for Elliot Goldenthal. Now, Elliot Goldenthal doing a great job, not doing the typical horror movie soundtrack, doing work that I think is a fair bit more emotional and really improving the film that way. He went on to be quite successful and was nominated for an Academy Award for his work on Interview with the Vampire 4 years after this. Now, something we're looking out for here right now, that name on the gravestone, that's Smucky. I hope you saw it. Smucky is an odd name, you might think, and it's a biographical one. Quite a lot of the story of Pet Sematary is autobiographical, drawing from Stephen King's own experience, and Smucky was a cat of his that he lost to a traffic accident. So there's a nice little tribute there that in the early set design there, they've got a little tribute to Smucky, which I thought was quite cute. Something I also noticed is that this was written by Stephen King. Oh, how good is that timing? They've just got it on there. Screenplay by Stephen King. Yes. Not his first cameo, but it's an early cameo. It's also an early writing gig for him. Now, far from the only one. He did the writing on Creepshow, he did the writing on Cat's Eye, he did the writing on Silver Bullet and Maximum Overdrive, which he also directed after this. We probably won't talk about Maximum Overdrive too much. But he'd done quite a bit of writing before he got to Pet Sematary, so I think he'd refined his style a fair bit. However, there are still some noticeable Stephen King-isms that were not pruned out in a way that they are in later productions. Just while we're talking about the autobiographical elements of Pet Sematary, we should note that in addition to having a cat who was hit by hit and killed in traffic, it was also set in Maine, where Stephen King lives. He also recounts a story of nearly losing his oldest son, who's now the author Joe Hill, nearly losing him to being hit by a truck. And of course, Stephen King once infamously offed a toddler with a fatal morphine dose. For clarification, that is slander and a joke, but don't worry about that too much. Basically, Stephen King is drawing from very clear biographical elements of his life to make this a very personal story, and I will be presenting you with a reading that makes it a heck of a lot more personal than that as we go forward. Now I'll talk a little bit about who directed this. That is Mary Lambert. Now, she was not a big figure at the time. I wouldn't say she's huge in the industry even now. This was an early gig for her, a sort of early opportunity that was quite a step up from what she'd been doing earlier. She was originally a music video director working with Madonna, These will be music videos you know. And she got this by a bit of random chance. It was originally offered to George Romero, but he was not available. The production got delayed a bit, and suddenly George Romero was no longer available to direct. He went on to make Monkey Shines in 1988. And you'll notice that he's releasing a movie in 1988. He was meant to be working on this. This comes out in 1989. So you can get the feeling that this production did take a little bit of time. They did have a little bit of delay there. It was also offered to makeup artist extraordinaire Tom Savini, but he didn't take that. He was very involved, of course, with Stephen King via Creepshow and Creepshow 2. And George Romero, of course, directed Creepshow and later The Dark Half, an adaptation of one of the Stephen King Richard Bachman novels, which I'm really fond of. It's pretty forgotten. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but I think it's got a lot to say for it. It's got some very creative imagery. But we'll move away from The Dark Half and we'll go back to talking about Pet Sematary. There you can see Fred Gwynne playing Judd. He is a little bit adorable. Something that absolutely blew my mind is that Fred Gwynne is best known as Herman Munster. That reference might not mean a lot to Zoomers, but to me, it stands out. I thought it was lovely. He's perfect for this role. He's playing it quite broad, but it really sort of centers the film in Maine. He really tries to embody that kind of authenticity, that accent. He's not afraid about dampening it down the way I think the other characters do. That helps them feel a tiny bit out of place, but that's not really a tension that I think the film plays on too much. You'll see that Rachel does keep a bit of her distance from Judd. She feels more out of place, but you're going to see that Lewis settles right in. He's much more at home with Judd. And there's some interesting character work around that. Now, I'm going to get my early nitpick in here. This is not a perfect film. It's a film I like very much, but it's not perfect. Let's note the cat there. There is their cat, Church, just lying on the bed next to Ellie. I'm just going to pay a little attention to Church. I have conflicting information on this cat. I know the number one thing you want to know from this commentary is about the cats that were used, and my sources are conflicted. We're going to get a very lazy scare here in just a second. Quick look out there. My sources are torn on whether... Shameful lazy scare, how dare you. They're going to hold off on the traditional horror elements later, but almost to balance that out, there are a couple of lazy scares in there. Such as that one. Now, as I say, minor controversy. Did they use 7 cats to play the cat Church, short for Winston Churchill, or did they use 9? I have different sources on that. The remake in 2019 was far more efficient. They only needed 5 cats to do that. And something I found really amusing was that because cats aren't particularly fond of being trained, you basically have to have 1 cat for each kind of move that you need. So you'll have a cat who can jump, you'll have a cat who will follow you to a place. And there was a stunt cat in Pet Sematary whose speciality was standing there. That amuses me no end. Now, I think that cat is slacking. I've trained my own cat to high five and jump through my arms, so I think they could probably do a little bit more there. We've also just had our first name drop there for the film. If any of you said, hey, that's the name of the film, congratulations, you think the way I do. There's something earlier that I thought was worth commenting on. Now, this is a while back. This is when they first meet Judd at 6:45. And that was when Rachel the mother here, the wife of Lewis, notices a path, and the first thing she asks is, "Where's that path go?" I just thought, you've just met this guy. That's kind of a little weird thing to mention. It's just a little weird that that's one of the first things you ask about. And while we're doing the early character stuff, I'll just note here that that is Missy Dandridge. That is a character who does not exist in the remake. And she's an odd character. She's not used in a particularly conventional way here. We don't see much of her. She will die later. She gives us a little bit of a philosophical contrast with Lewis that we'll get to. But her main character trait is that she has a horrible stomach pain, which we'll later find out is cancerous. But the way she handles that idea of the pain and upcoming death is quite interesting. Now, going on here, there we are, our first trip to the Pet Sematary. Why is it misspelled like that? Well, the information we're going to get is that that's effectively established by children. They've done the sign. It was for the benefit of children, so they misspelled it. I find that an interesting touch here. And something I sort of struggled with in this scene, even though I appreciate that it's getting down to business very quickly in establishing the plot. This is a brisk film. Is I struggle a little bit with Rachel's delivery here. Now she's, I of course immediately forget the actress's name. She's played by Denise Crosby, who most of you are going to know best from Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'll just point out here, as some people have come in, we are at exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes is where we're at this point. I won't be able to come back to chat too much. I find Denise Crosby's acting here as Rachel a bit difficult. She brings a lot of hostility and stiffness here that's a bit odd early on at this point. Now, we're going to find out that she has some deep-seated issues around death, some extreme discomfort around it. And so the fact that she's in a graveyard here, it's setting her off, it's making her extremely uncomfortable, and that's why she's extremely terse there with Judd. But when I watch this, I do find that her acting repressed, her acting tense. It does seem like stiff acting, basically. So when you're watching this for the first time, it can be a bit difficult to warm to her. But on rewatches, you can understand the choices she's making. Now, I should point out that there we have the other members of the family. So we have Gage, and there is young Ellie. Now, Ellie's quite interesting there. She is played by twins. They are Bo and Blaze Burdall. Obviously, in filmmaking, when you're working with young children, there are intense restrictions around what that you can do, how long they can film for. And so it's often easier to shoot with twins. In this case, it was one twin who did most of the work, with a sort of backup twin for shots. So Blaze is doing most of the work. Blaze Burdall is doing most of the work as Ellie there and delivering most of the lines. Although in an interesting choice, there is only one actor for the younger son, Gage Creed, and that actor is Miko Hughes. We'll talk about him a bit later because he's got quite an interesting history. He was a child star, and in rapid succession, he was in a lot of movies that you will know. And you would think with him being younger, with him just being a toddler, they would go for twins, but Mary Lambert decided not to. She thought Miko did a really good performance. She thought she could work with him. And so she insisted that they only work with one actor there. I think this might be the only time in the film that we see Ellie in glasses, incidentally. I'm going to be watching out for that, and I hope you will too. Just an odd little detail. We're going to get something here that I really like picking up on. There is a lot of foreshadowing at work here in this scene. It might look like just a basic setup around the kitchen table, but they're building in some interesting ideas. So Stephen King, writing this script, builds in lots of foreshadowing. He's talking about how Church's operation to be castrated will help, and he'll come back almost the same. Maybe I'm having a reach here, but the idea that someone can go through that major change and come back, but be a little bit different, that's obviously going to happen in this film, but in a much more sinister way. There's also some setup that we're going to get a little bit later. There we go. I might be reading too much into that here. We're also getting a little bit of a tension here of how Lewis, played by Dale Midkiff there, is, and I forget every actor's name, yes, Dale Midkiff as Lewis Creed. A little tension with how he deals with things. When there's conflict, he kind of wants to be avoidant, he wants to break away. That's some more foreshadowing that we're going to get, that we're going to see paid off. Now here he's going to talk with Missy, and as well as establishing, you know, a nice little joke about Missy introducing some colourful language that gets picked up by Ellie. We have an interesting detail that Dale, who's a doctor, who's moved here to become the doctor at the university, he's asking about the stomach pain that Missy is suffering from. And his instinct is, I've got to do something, I have to intervene. And hers is this kind of stoic, no, I've just got to suffer with it. It's just part of things. It'll pass. I can deal with it. She has this really stoic approach where she sort of accepts the suffering. She doesn't try to avoid it. That's really all she does. We are going to see her only briefly in this film. She will take her own life later. But it's interesting that she just introduces that little clash where she's sort of accepting the pain, she's embracing it, she's dealing with it head on. And Lewis, he thinks he has to sort it, he has to fix it. Now, we've had quite a jump here. I want you to just pay attention to the other doctor, the Indian doctor. You briefly saw him. He is going to be back in shot briefly, but otherwise you're not going to see him. Bear him in mind. He's a bit neglected. The chap on the table there is the character Victor Pascal. Victor is really key. He's kind of a classic Stephen King character. The way he's used, infusing the supernatural with a bit of quirkiness, a bit of campness even. And also the classic Stephen King element of using the advantages you have of the written story to blur the lines between fact and fiction, to mix it up between whether the character is really seeing something or whether the character's imagining it. That is classic Stephen King. In here, is this scene really happening? Is Victor really coming back? Probably not. This is probably all in Lewis's head. And that is establishing an element of Pet Sematary that I think is not really talked about much, which is that the family, I think all of the family, as far as we can tell, have the gift of The Shining from the novel. Oh, I forget the name of it. It's one of his well-known ones. He had written The Shining early on, I want to say 1979, so 4 years before Pet Sematary. And it's interesting that he likes that idea. He's already sort of building connections between his stories, making his own little Stephen King universe. The fact that we see Lewis having a sort of psychic vision, a psychic connection there, is I think, an example of The Shining in action. You're going to get, that might sound like a reach, but we get a strong confirmation of that theory right now. If you just heard that, that was Victor saying, "Hi, Doc." Obviously, in The Shining, that is a nickname for Danny Torrance. That the wonderful Scatman Crothers say. I've temporarily forgot the chef's name. Dick Halloran. There we go. Dick Halloran calls Danny Torrance Doc, and we just get Victor Pascal calling Lewis Doc just then. Obviously, he's an actual doctor, but I maintain this is not a reach. This is a nice connection that King is using. Even in 1989, it's extremely obvious that The Shining is the breakout Stephen King movie. It is the standout one. It is the most acclaimed one, even if King is rather unhappy about how far it deviates from his work. We're going to see a few more tributes to The Shining in this, including an extremely blatant copy of a shot. And that is not a criticism of mine there. It's recognizing that Mary Lambert directing this was inspired by Kubrick's version of The Shining, and she's replicating a shot from it. So, as I said, we'll also see the other members of the family exhibit Shining here. Now, Victor is quite gruesome. You'll notice that this film is not going to be shy about the gore. It has a pretty hard 18 rating for the time, but it managed to get away in the UK without any cuts. But I think that's predominantly because cuts had already happened on the American end before it was sent to Britain. But the only details of cuts I could find are later in the film, and I'll talk about them when we get to them. You can see there that there's some fog on the path. That's a really nice detail. It's taken straight from the book, obviously, because Stephen King is adapting his work. He wants all his important details in. And when he refers to the moonlight making the path to the Pet Sematary glow, then he considers that important. So he made sure that was in the script, and Mary Lambert made sure to capture it. She's using some fake mist and then getting the right kind of lighting on it to diffuse properly so that it has that glowing effect, but it doesn't look too janky. And I thought that was a really nice decision that she made. We're also going to notice a sort of interesting dynamic that even though Victor here looks grim, he's gory, he's spooky, he is actually going to be giving good advice. He is going to be helping them. He is effectively a good angel here. And the bad angel, I suppose, the devil on the shoulder, is going to be Judd. He is going to give bad advice unintentionally throughout this. Now, as I said, Stephen King likes to blur the line between fact and fiction, reality and imagination constantly throughout his stories. And we're going to get an early payoff here. Now, this isn't particularly unique here. Lewis here just waking up in bed after that weird dream where he's skipped all over the place, he's covered vast distances, so we're thinking, was it just a dream? No. There's that reveal from the dirt on the sheets on his feet. No, he actually went out. It's a bit of a classic reveal. You may be reminded of that sort of twist in the X-Files pilot episode, obviously made way after this. But I also thought of the Twilight Zone second season premiere, King 9 Will Not Return before. So it's kind of an established trope, you know, that someone's had a dream, you don't know if it was real or not. And in the case of the Twilight Zone episode, a man dreams that he is in the desert and then passes out. He wakes up in hospital, and then the doctors examine his shoes and they have sand in them. It's a nice touch. I mean, you don't have to be original. It's fine to reuse a common trope, but I do just want to recognise it here. For anyone wondering, we're on 24 minutes 40. 24:40. Okay. So yeah, as we say, we've got Denise Crosby, probably best known to you as Tasha Yar from The Next Generation. And if you don't know that, get out Zoomers. Dale Midkiff there, I think, is best known from this. When I was watching this, all I could think about was he looks like Jason Bateman and he sounds like Jensen Ackles. This is not a criticism. Dale Midkiff after this, I think, has had a consistent career. It hasn't gone into the heights, but he's got consistent work. He did a series of Christian movies, I noticed. You notice the clothes that he settled into here. Now, this is possibly something you might say I'm overthinking, but you notice how he settled into instantly more humble, workman-like clothes. I also point out he's matching Judd Crandall. Their outfits are very similar here, just while they deal with the sad loss of Church there. And it's showing how he instantly settles into this neighborhood. It's a nice bit of character work told through story. You're not going to see Rachel do similar. We'll examine that in a bit more depth here, but there are subtle details in this film about Lewis and Rachel coming from quite different backgrounds. They don't say it verbally, but there is tension between Lewis and Rachel's family, and it's some of that difference in background will explain it, and it's neatly done. It's easily missed. Now, I talked about that foreshadowing earlier. We've just had the sad news that Church has been killed, and you'll notice that Lewis's first instinct after Church dies is that he's going to lie. He's going to pretend he hasn't seen the cat, he can't find it, and he'll try and hide the truth from his family. That is sort of his central flaw. He is an avoider. He doesn't want to he doesn't want to deal with the difficulties of death, the horrors of the permanent change. How characters face death is central to Pet Sematary. He doesn't have the good approach. He has his own way of being flawed here. And most of the characters are going to have flawed approaches. You may have just caught there, that was the Smucky headstone that he was just in front of. And now Judd has had a very bad idea. You may have noticed there are so many details here, it's hard to keep up with. When Lewis goes to see Judd instantly to get the news about Church being killed, Judd's got that hood up. He's sort of hooded, shadowed. You can't see his face. He looks quite sinister. Now, yeah, he's trying to give bad news there. It's really unfortunate. And the film has done a heck of a lot of work setting up how deadly those trucks are. They've had several conversations about it by this point. The trucks are going to flash by throughout the film as a sort of reminder of the presence of death, the inescapability of it, but also the permanence of it. And Judd's sort of sinister hooded look, I think, is the forewarning we get that even though he's a well-intentioned guy, he's the devil on the shoulder. He's giving the bad advice. Now, I'm going to have to say there is a problem here. We will discuss Judd Crandall's motivation quite a lot later, but it is a sort of central problem in the story that I think a fix does exist for. But for now, I should mention very quickly, we just heard a Wendigo. At 28:18, we heard a Wendigo. Now, Judd, because he gives fantastic advice the whole time, dismisses it as a loon. And that's that's an interesting choice of bird. Why say it's a loon? A loon is like lunatic, or if someone's a bit loony. You mention a loon as if it's a figment of your imagination. You've imagined it. You're being a bit of a loony if you hear it. This commentary will have many reaches, folks, don't worry. But the main point of that is to mention that both the book, this film, and the remake mention the Wendigo that is nominally in the forest, nominally has a fair bit to do with this plot. But we never see it. In the remake, they do a bit more with it. We see an illustration of a Wendigo. It's not really functioning like we would expect a traditional Wendigo to function if you've been particularly swayed by the depiction in Supernatural, or maybe in the slightly obscure Canadian horror comedy Ravenous with David Arquette and Robert Carlyle. You might expect a Wendigo to be more openly cannibalistic. Here, I think Stephen King is just using it as a sort of sinister force in the forest, but we don't see much of it. We don't see anything of it, and we only get a couple of hints about the Wendigo. For me, that's a bit of a loss. It's a really interesting element, and I would love to see them explore it. I mean, they are working on a prequel to the 2019 remake, so maybe we could get some Wendigo action there. It's a very underexplored creature. Now, of course, there's another element that I have to mention here quickly, is that there's a slightly politically incorrect aspect here, that they are going to a Indian burial ground, quite the trope at the time, a bit cancelable nowadays, you know, but this was just a trope at the time. It's fine. Poltergeist, a couple of years before, used the trope. The remake, of course, changes it very considerably. In the remake, wary of upsetting people with reference to the Micmac Indian tribe, they say that when the sort of evil force turned up, the Micmac legged it out of there. So trying to avoid any connotation that the Micmac were involved in something supernatural and sinister. As I say, it's a trope that's gone out of fashion a bit. Let's see. At this point, I set up that Judd and Victor, they're kind of the angel and devil on Lewis's shoulder. And this bit is making that explicit. It's juxtaposing the bits of information that Lewis has been given. That weird little quote that Victor said about the soil of a man's heart is stonier. Judd giving that line and then giving us a flashback to Victor. Okay, it's not subtle. I'm fine with it. I quite liked it. It's a style at the time. I mean, Stephen King films are not typically hugely subtle, let's be honest. And especially when Stephen King writes it himself, you know, we are going to see elements that are not stripped out. We're going to get elements that I think it's fair to say are quite out there, frankly. Elements that the remake removed to make a subtler, some people said dull. I am actually a massive fan of the remake. I love this as well. And I think they take vastly different approaches to the source material. But I think the fact that we have a really early career junior director in Mary Lambert meant that she wasn't really inclined to challenge Stephen King as much as she might otherwise. There we see the sort of gamble taken that you have an actual tiny toddler, like not even 3 years old, Miko Hughes there, doing the line reading. And of course, Lewis once again avoiding conflict. A lot of this film is going to be asking, is Lewis going to be able to face reality, face the horrible reality of death? We'll see. Well, I'm hoping you've actually seen this beforehand and you're not just watching my my commentary. We have another cheap cat scare. As I said, we aren't getting the killings super quick in this. There's not really much room for it. Mary Lambert uses a couple of jump scares to keep it lively, you know. When you're watching a horror film, you do want a couple of... Something like this, we don't expect The Shining. We don't expect cachet. We want a few quick scares. You could accuse it of using too many, and I wouldn't particularly fight you on that, but there's so much I love about this film, I am willing to overlook an excessive reliance on jump scares. I'll just point out there in the garage when the cat's eyes were glowing, that was a natural effect that was done in camera. It's a property of cat's eyes that you can just literally shine a light off them and get that wonderful effect. So that was done all naturally. And to Mary Lambert's great credit, she massively avoids any off-camera post-production effects. There's really only two elements that, I suppose 3 elements that stood out to me. There is a weird little phantasm thing very late in the game. There is I believe, a compositing shot when Gage is killed. Spoilers, folks. And when Victor Pascal as a ghost is fading, obviously that is a composite shot. But otherwise, everything is done with physical, practical, in-camera effects. And it really helps the film look gorgeous. If you want a comparison, let's just throw in, say, the Langoliers. And then you will know why you want to stick to the effects. Now, there was a really cool detail here. Sorry, there's so much to talk about in this film. It's hard to catch up with it. We've had the weird, mess you up thing that Church has returned. You might hear my own cat making his presence felt unexpectedly. That is Gatsby, and he will be talkative anyway. Church has returned. Lewis is freaked out. He goes straight to Judd, and they start in medias res in the middle of the conversation. And Judd is going back to the table with fresh beers, and they've already got 2 empty beers on the table. And I love that little detail. Just a little bit of world building that they decided, hey, Lewis has gone straight there and it's already taken 1 beer to kind of calm them down. They're carrying on the conversation on their 2nd beer. And so they've already set the table like that. And I just thought that was a really good bit of attention to detail. People talking about this film, they might enjoy the way Judd says the rod in such a specific way. South Park has a heck of a lot of fun, by the way. Both imitating Judd Crandall a lot. They've used a stock character who looks a lot like Judd throughout the series. They also had one of their Halloween episodes making fun of the Indian burial ground plot, as I recall. But people focusing on that attention, focusing on the creepiness, it's easy to miss some really nice work that is in the script, and especially is in the sort of directing. I'm going to give Mary Lambert a lot of credit in this film. There are lots of details that I think she brought in that need highlighting. They're easily missed. I also just want to note at this point that there's some really kind of nice, healthy masculinity in here. Stephen King is not afraid at this point, to just talk about the way men and women are different, and his framing of men will bear a burden, and they will bear a burden stoically. I like that. Now, that sort of deep observation is thrown off a bit by the prop rat there. Don't worry about the prop rat and the glowing cat eyes again. Let's focus on this idea that he says a man's heart is stonier. The garden of a man's heart is on stony ground. He grows what he can and tends it. And I think that's got quite a lot of truth to it. The idea that men will be stoic. They will have to... Healthy masculinity is bearing the burden, doing what you have to do, being a strong figure for your family. I really like that observation. When we talk about Stephen King, there's the schlock in there, but there is nice observation in there, as long as you stay off his Twitter, obviously. Now, I set up some foreshadowing earlier here. We've got Ellie here asking very directly about Church, very directly. The dream she had was exactly what happened in the previous night. And when Lewis called, when he spoke to her on the phone, she was asking about Church. Now, for me, that is a very strong indication that Ellie is psychic. She also has a shining, just like Danny Torrance. I like seeing the connection. We don't get many other connections to the rest of the Stephen King universe in this. While I've got a moment, I'll just point out that there's a reference in this film to a dog getting, when they talk about how quiet the area is, there's a little reference to a dog going crazy and having to be shot. That's obviously a reference to Cujo. In the remake, there's a cute little reference when Rachel crashes her car on the way back. There's a sign posting to Derry, so an obvious reference to it. But otherwise, Pet Sematary is relatively isolated from the rest of the Stephen King universe, which is why I just want to point out that connection here, that he liked the idea of The Shining. It's kind of a gentle psychic power, and he's reused it. Now here we're getting the end of our Missy Dandridge arc. As I said, not a hugely substantial character. If I'm very honest, I think she is in there to get a bit of horror, because it's a long time before we get the classic horror content of killing and murder. So throwing in this kind of horror is important. It also sets up an awesome little cameo that we're going to get to in just a second. Look at that contrast between the Pet Sematary, the refusal to accept death, and then the conventional funeral where it is accepted. Obviously, who's that handsome chap? Stephen King. Dressed up as a minister. It's one of my favourite cameos of his. Not my number one. It's quite cute. It's minimal. He'd done a lot more already. He'd helmed a whole segment of Creepshow. So this was quite minor for him. He lived very close to the production, so he was able to be on set for almost all of it. And I think he's quite keen on doing these cameos. Incidentally, my favourite one is him in It Chapter 2. That's the major redeeming factor of that movie for me. He's got a great humility and sort of crotchetiness in that cameo as an antique shop owner. There's a lot of metatextuality about it that's sweet. Here, it's just sort of interesting that he's a minister, especially knowing at the time Stephen King was kind of unconventional, an ex-hippie type, really into his rock music, which is also partly how Mary Lambert ends up with this job. She was directing rock music videos. He loved rock music videos. She knew the Ramones. He loves the Ramones. And through that connection, she gets a job, and she also talks to the Ramones, who make the special song Pet Sematary for the end of the film, which I think Stephen King absolutely loves. You also get the song Sheena as the Punk Rocker is thrown into the film at a key moment. Now, I feel it's probably a bit early to talk about the deeper reading of the film. I am going to try and get that in there. But before I do that, I'll just read a little bit about how Stephen King thinks about horror. He has a model that I really like, and we're going to use that as a bit of a lens to understand Pet Sematary. He phrased this differently in Dan's Macabre, so I'm just going to read a concise version of it. Dan's Macabre is his non-fiction book about his history with horror, his thoughts about it. It was published in 1982, so a year before Pet Sematary. So unfortunately, he does not refer to Pet Sematary at any point in it. But we get some interesting little references that make a lot of sense to us and sort of foreshadow where he got some ideas about Pet Sematary. So onto his model. The 3 types of terror. The gross out. The sight of a severed head tumbling down a flight of stairs. It's when the lights go out and something green and slimy splatters against your arm. Then the second type of terror is the horror. the unnatural spiders the size of bears, the dead waking up and walking around. It's when the lights go out and something with claws grabs you by the arm. And the last and worst one, terror. When you come home and notice everything you own had been taken away and replaced by an exact substitute. It's when the lights go out and you feel something behind you. You hear it, you feel its breath against your ear, you turn around and there's nothing there. In his book, King elaborates, I recognize terror as the finest emotion, and so I'll try and terrorize the reader. But if I find I cannot terrify him or her, I'll try to horrify. And if I find I can't horrify, I'll go for the gross out. I'm not proud. I thought that's a nice bit of honesty. In the scene we're seeing now, Denise Crosby playing Rachel is kind of unloading, talking about that family history. This is a family home we are going to go back to. She's talking about the trauma of her sister Zelda, who was dying of a horrible, I want to say, spinal meningitis. In the deformity that Zelda has, the puking, the rotten spine, we're kind of getting the gross out. We're going to get kind of goblin-like energy that's also kind of gross out later when Zelda appears again as a vision. There's also a horror element in Zelda. By the way, notice that painting. She's just passed a painting. That is very important. The director wanted you to notice that painting. So many details, folks. So Zelda has that thing of being in an unnatural position. Something's a bit wrong, but Zelda's also raising the terror of something being deeply, deeply wrong, something seriously unnerving. This is something I'll maybe try and get on later, because Zelda is quite complex in how she's used. There's elements where I think she's used really badly, but there's also some subtle stuff in there that is, frankly, I think highly problematic. It's a bit cancelable, basically, but we'll try and get onto that later. So I said there are some flaws with the writing, and I think we see that here. The conversation that Lewis has had here, he doesn't engage with his wife's trauma that she's just unloaded there. That trauma that I think explains some of the frostiness and stiffness we saw earlier. He doesn't engage with it. He sort of moves away from it to blaming the parents. Here's that the Ramones song I told you about. And I'm not sure if that's just consistent with Lewis being avoidant, but it seems to me like Stephen King not really thinking what someone would actually say in that situation. Like when Rachel meets Judd for the first time and then just asks about a random path. I wasn't a fan of it. We've got a while until one of the major events there, so I'll just try and explain that painting we saw earlier. If I get a chance, it'll pop up a few times. But just to point out, watch for that painting. When Rachel's going down the stairs, they pause to make sure you could see it. It's of the little child in a blue dress wearing a top hat. If you notice, the child is also wearing the exact same dress that Zelda is. You're going to see that dress again. You're going to see that painting again. And it's to tie an element of horror to that childhood trauma of her sister suffering. It's also very, very important how Zelda is locked away. This is also a kind of avoidance. It's death in the family in a way you can't deal with. Zelda is symbolically important. The fact that she's in the house, but she's locked away, no one wants to look at her. And it's quite reflective of a modern attitude that we do try and avoid death. We keep it secret. We don't tend to have people dying in our homes. We won't display the body in our homes the way we would previously. There's another element that being an older sibling, Zelda is, the sibling is a closeness, but there's the inevitability of death. This is reminding Rachel of her own death. Anyway, This is one of those moments that people will know most from the film, the very tragic death of Gabe. Now, that shot of him just in front of the truck, I think that was a composited shot. I don't think they could have done that in camera properly and safely. Possibly, if he chose the right camera lens, you could make it appear that Miko Hughes was a lot closer to the truck than he actually was, but I think in terms of insurance, they wouldn't have risked it. So having looked over it a few times, I'm pretty sure they composited young Miko into that shot. And they make the very sensible decision not to show too much of it, to focus on the emotional impact. And that's something I love. If you include his body, it would be messy, it would be horrible. I think realistically, when we do actually see his body, it's a bit too together, but that's a minor complaint. I'm not going to really grill the film for it. When it does so much right, it has restraint here. The film is going to go full schlock mode later, but right now, it's going very restrained, and I absolutely love that Judd kind of takes over, and Lewis is just broken here. The man who has been very avoidant, whose first instinct is to kind of lie and keep death away, hide it. It's unavoidable for him, and he's broken. Now, obviously, anyone would be affected by this, losing such a young child. But he is so broken. I think Dale Midkiff's performance is absolutely wonderful. I really like how Judd just recognizes that he's non-functional. In the remake, they also made the sensible decision to not show too much. Although, if you've watched the remake, I'm hoping I'm not I don't think I spoil too much when I say they actually flip it round. So in the remake, it is Ellie who is killed by the truck, and Gage lives, and consequently, Ellie is in a reverse situation. Ellie is played by only one actor, the rather excellent Jete Laurence, and there are twins playing Gage, so back to how things would normally be done. That opens some really interesting possibilities for them in the remake. And sticking with the remake, they don't include this scene. They do not do the funeral, and I think that's for the better. To be honest, I like this film, but I find this melodramatic. I think it's Stephen King not restraining himself too much, and I'm not a fan of it. Now, you're going to see Lewis restrained by a chap in a second. And you see what I mean? It's just a bit over the top. There we go. Now, you might be wondering who's this random Indian guy? That's his colleague from the university. Now, I think they shot a lot more of it, but it's easy to kind of miss that. And just, you only see him when Victor's brought in after the accident. And so it's easy to be a bit confused there, I think. I think they probably cut a bit too much out of him, and they could have done with the scene of him chatting to Lewis, because otherwise it seems a bit random. But anyway, that's who that guy was. I'm going to try and really quickly go over this. I talked about the different backgrounds and some interesting stuff here about the tension between Lewis's family and Rachel's. Talked about how we see Lewis, even though he's a doctor, so very good professional class, should be high status. We see from how quickly he fits in with Judd and throws on classic working class main clothes. He probably is from a working class background. The hints we get are that Rachel is from a much more upper middle class background, and there's tension with Lewis. You get the feeling like already the family don't like him. You also have an interesting aspect that isn't focused on, but Rachel's family are Jewish. So her maiden name is Goldman. Let me just confirm. Yeah, Goldman, which you can't easily pick up. But you also notice her name is Rachel. Her sister was Zelda. Zelda is a typically Jewish name. The Yiddish form is Zelig, and it means sort of maiden, strong maiden, basically. There's certain irony to the name. But the point is, yeah, the family probably are Jewish, more upper middle class. So there's that extra level of sort of difference between Lewis's background and hers. And I just get the feeling that the parents kind of look down on him a bit because they probably view him as a bit too rough, a bit too working class. Not, he's a doctor, but he's still not really what they wanted for their daughter, especially moving out into the middle of nowhere. Now, is that reading way too much into it? Possibly. But these details are in the movie for you to pick up, and it can help explain some of the tension that's between their families. Now, did there need to be tension? Well, not really, but it's kind of just for a plot reason. Basically, Pet Sematary needs to give Lewis a reason to not go to Rachel's family after the death of Gage. For obvious plot reasons, as we'll get to, he needs to be able to make a very bad decision about Gage. And he can't do that if Rachel's there, so she needs to go and take Ellie, and he needs to stay at home. And so that's why Stephen King has written in that they don't get on, there's big tension. But I just thought that the sort of interesting character work in the background detail really helps sell it. They don't make a big deal of it, but you can notice. Now, I've said something very nice and subtle about the subtleties of the film. I'm now going to have a go at it. I think we have some bad writing here, I'm sorry to say. Stephen King sort of being a bit too broad, a bit too rough. The problem with this scene is that Judd puts the idea in Lewis's mind. And Judd isn't meant to be a bad guy, but he comes in here and basically says, I sure hope you aren't thinking of, resurrecting Gage. And we had no indication that Lewis was. No indication whatsoever. Judd is unintentionally being the devil on the shoulder here. Now, you can get around that. I would personally rewrite it. I would have Judd pick up the idea that Lewis is thinking about it by just sort of talking to him about, how terrible it is to get used to the big change. Your life has changed forever, but you can move on from this. This will get normal. And for Lewis to indicate that, no, he doesn't think it's changed. He doesn't think it's the new normal. Like he's considering, maybe I can go back. Maybe I can fix this. Some kind of hesitation from Lewis there might help, and let Judd pick up the idea. But instead, Judd just comes in and basically puts the idea in his head. Now, is that intentional? I'm not sure. I think we're going to get a few lines here that are kind of clunky that to me imply that Stephen King didn't necessarily think this through. Anyway, I'll just point out we are at 58:35. Hopefully you are where I am, folks. I did say there was going to be a deeper reading into the meaning of Pet Sematary here. I'm not going to do that quite yet. I think there's a useful bit where it goes a bit quiet and I can do that. But I'll point out there's this scene here is an obvious interpretation that you can apply to Pet Sematary. That is, we're here seeing the story of Timmy Bateman, who dies coming back from World War II, and so is then buried after that, and is resurrected, but he isn't the same. He's actually kind of crazed, a sort of absolute violent, gory psychopath. Now, the obvious metaphor there is coming back from the war, you're a changed man. That's quite spelt out. That's a really obvious interpretation that I think was intended. And it's a classic one. Think of the scouring of the Shire. You can go on the big adventure, you can go on the war, but you can't leave it behind. I think that's what they were getting at. Another little neat detail in that backstory is the thing that Timmy says, hate the living, love death. I'm going to have to find the exact quote there. But what he says there is a quote from Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein. I'll look for that exact quote, forgive me. Yes, love dead, hate living. That's a quote from the James Whale, Bride of Frankenstein, 1935. Obviously, Pet Sematary is a very different story from Frankenstein. It's hugely different. But the reference to someone going against the laws of nature, resurrecting the dead, and then not being able to control their creation, you can understand why Stephen King wanted to put that reference in there. Now, this film is from 1989, as I've said a few times. You're really reminded of that when you look at this scene. Look at this old airport. Look at people being able to just go right up to the gate. You're going to see a lot of things here. I know this is a bit of a cliche point right now, but the lack of airport security is going to stand out to you later. It certainly stands out to me now. Now we're getting this moment here. Once again, Ellie is showing a heck of a lot of insight. She knows what's going on. And Lewis, his impulse, it's to bottle up, it's to hide the truth from his family. He's thinking it. And here he goes. This is why he needed to be away from his family. This is why Stephen King needed to create the tension with his family. I'll take a little moment here. I was wondering if it was worth saying something about religious elements of this, because it can be very tempting. You know, Stephen King writes himself in as a minister. The family is called Creed. The cat, even though its full name is Winston Churchill, it's shortened to Church. So first the church is lost, and then the whole creed is damaged. But to be honest, folks, I'm going to be honest with you. I think that's a reach. It's a fun reach. They, I think, have to bring religious ideas into this. They discuss heaven. They discuss faith. Ellie asks earlier about Gage being in heaven, and Lewis says, yeah, he thinks we go on after death. Now, obviously, it's coloured for him because he's brought church back, so he now knows there's a supernatural possibility, which is quite interesting. But overall, Stephen King is not hugely interested in religion. He doesn't go for that, so I don't think he really was wanting to say much about it. So the whole church and creed thing, for me, it's a bit of a coincidence. Now this is a shot straight out of The Shining. This is a shot I told you about, this slow move around the corridor, overhearing a child's voice as a child is having a sort of psychic vision, and you move to see through a doorway a mirror. It's not exactly like the shot early on in The Shining where Danny Torrance is in the bathroom, but it's pretty close. If you're rewatching The Shining anytime soon, just think of that shot we just saw, and you'll see there's quite a lot of similarity there. We're going to see some more subtle work here that I quite like. So I've pointed out a few flaws with the film recently, so we're going to go back to pointing out some nice details, you know, this consistent work about what Ellie is able to see. A kind of classic Stephen King thing of someone having psychic knowledge but kind of mishearing it. So like Red Rum, we get Pax Cow with Ellie misunderstanding Pascal. These are classic Stephen King-isms. But there's a really cute detail that we're going to get here. Rachel, back in the family home, Look at her. She is surrounded by photos, absolutely surrounded by them. Those are referencing just memories. It's like she's being absolutely surrounded by the memories that is upsetting her, traumatizing her. She can't escape them. They're absolutely, all over her. You're noticing again this idea of the whole family there, able to have a bit of the shining there. I'm just going to point out I absolutely love how Victor Pascal is played, the sort of camp weirdness to him. It's fantastic. Now, I had a little bit that I wanted to cover that I thought was an interesting bit of potential inspiration for Pet Sematary. There is that painting again, by the way. Weird looking child, top hat, weird cat. That blue dress that was painted specifically for the film. So going back to Danse Macabre. Remember, this was written a year before Pet Sematary. Perhaps the supreme realization of this return to childhood comes in David Cronenberg's marvelous horror film, The Brood, where a disturbed woman is literally producing children of rage who go out and murder the members of her family one by one. About halfway through the film, her father sits dispiritedly on the bed in an upstairs room, drinking and mourning his wife, who's been the first to feel the wrath of the brood. We cut to the bed itself, and clawed hands suddenly reach out from beneath it and dig into the carpeting near the doomed father's shoes. And so Cronenberg pushes us down the slide. We are 4 again, and all of our worst surmises about what might be lurking under the bed have turned out to be true. Can you think why I highlighted that? The idea of Stephen King, the year before he publishes Pet Sematary, writing about the horror of something lurking under the bed, something very key to children, something reaching out and attacking you from under the bed. I don't know. Maybe something comes up in this film relevant to that. It's a cute little detail. I noticed it. I thought you might appreciate it. Let's see. Now, we did, unfortunately, in that miss my favourite joke in the film. And it was easily missed, so I apologise. That was at 1 hour and 6. There was a low-key, very funny shot there where Rachel is worrying about Lewis and he's not answering the phone. And so her parents say, oh, come on, he's probably out getting food. You know what men are like when no one's at home, aka men aren't homemakers. He's not going to cook for himself. He's going to get takeout. You then immediately cut to a shot of Judd just making a PB&J sandwich, just like the laziest thing you could do. I thought that was really funny. Now, it's a subtle joke. It's not played with a laugh track or anything. It's not really dwelt on. It's really easy to miss it. But I thought there was a really cute little bit of observational humour, subtly told, that wasn't given so much emphasis that it disrupts the tone. Because obviously right now we're in kind of dark territory. We're about to see a child's body. It's grim, it's heartfelt, so you don't want to emphasize a comedy at this point. Even the slightly comedic element of Victor, it has to be downplayed a bit for the sort of more sardonic, menacing humor. So it's nicely judged. Again, one of those little details that Mary Lambert included that I really liked. Now, this is again the film being quite tasteful in what it shows. We're kind of saving up for the Grand Guignol. Here in this shot, going through the home, look how everything is skewed with those memories. The photos that I've said are just indicative of all the memories. They're out of order, they're chaotic. This is Rachel overwhelmed. Oh, hey, it's that painting again. They really want you to notice the painting, associate it with that trauma that she's having. Remember, Zelda wore the same dress. We are going to see it again at multiple points. But this is just re-establishing, setting up, making sure you're aware. Rachel is able to work within the sort of psychic realm. Now, I said there was something quite problematic here. It's an interesting detail, but they've gone for the uncanny, the terror. So the highest form is that sort of unsettling thing. You will notice here that Zelda is played by a male actor. This is a man playing a female. Same thing happened in Rec, by the way, the exact same idea, that they wanted an extremely thin dude to play a female because they wanted that uncanny effect. In Rec, it was Javier Botet, who has Marfan syndrome, so he is absolutely skeletal. In this, I don't think the actor has anything like that. I couldn't find any detail. But the idea was to use, well, basically trans casting. Don't read too much into that, folks. To make it more subtly unnerving, sort of. And in terms of Stephen King's model of the horror, is that horror? Is it terror? I don't know, but it's a little bit beyond the gross out. Remember what I said about airport security? That doesn't exactly hold up, does it? So in the remake, they did not do any trans casting. I think they probably felt they would get into trouble from that. They did their casting very much by modern standards. You'll notice particularly Victor Pascal does not look Polish. I mean, the actor does a fine job, but I like this Victor. I like the camp, menacing, sardonic Victor. The actor in the remake plays it very straight. And I didn't like it as much, if I'm honest. This sort of, the slight camp ghost thing, it's much more Stephen King. It's much more in line with his vibe. Now, we praised the work of the composer earlier. That was, forgive me, I just got to check the name, Elliot Goldenthal. I really like his decision here to use music that is a lot more emotional. Music that is invoking heartache, rather than trying to be super scary music. It's focusing on emotion and heartache, and I think this is a kind of thing that adds a lot more weight to Pet Sematary. It gives it a lot more staying power. It is avoiding easy choices. That falling tree, by the way, an indication of the Wendigo. It is underexplored. You might also interpret it as Victor trying to make the tree fall and block the path. We do see elements that's quite underemphasized of the evil force of the burial ground is trying to sabotage Rachel getting back. And I wonder, but Victor is able to help her. It comes off as quite comic, to be honest. But I wonder if dropping the tree was Victor as well, trying to help out, that you got these two battling supernatural forces. We're about to get one of the weird effect shots. One of the ones that will make you quite grateful for Mary Lambert's decision to focus on full in-camera effects, because yeah, that looks quite weird. What was that? What kind of vision was it? It's hard to say. I don't think it was thought out, to be honest. It's an odd choice. The goopy head there that you saw was actually Rachel's dad, so Lewis's father-in-law, who he's had big conflict, big drama with. It's quite blink and you'll miss it, though. I'll be honest. It looks a bit goofy. Some people like it. Some people like that you'll get these goofy elements. For me, I prefer that they stick to in-camera effects, to be honest. Let's see where we are. Now, I talked about nice detail. Victor was haggling. Now, you might not have picked it up when I was talking, but look at the scratch on the car. When she's trying to book it, she's warned about, oh, we've only got this one car. It's got the scratch on the side. And, well, look, there it is. They remembered that detail. I kind of love that. At this point in the remake, this exact point, this is where they have the little sign pointing to Derry. So a little Easter egg for it. And I like that. Now, we're going to get some interesting stuff coming up. We're going to get some more homages. I've talked about the links to The Shining. I talked about that shot that was directly taken from The Shining. I mean, people might quibble that, but I think it's too close to really dispute. We're going to see a Carrie homage there. It might be in a moment. So that'll be from the 1976 Brian De Palma Carrie. It's not played the same way, but I'll point it out when we get to it. It's kind of hard to miss, and I read it as very deliberate. I should also say that the remake goes much further in terms of taking from The Shining, like a huge amount further. The remake opens with an overhead panning shot of the train, just like The Shining does. And it also includes a sort of scene of someone being attacked in a bathroom and trying to keep threat out that is, well, obviously like the bathroom attack scene in The Shining. There's our little Carrie tribute. Do you reckon I'm reaching? I know. It's not like other films don't do it, but it seems to me a bit of a coincidence. So I think that was a subtle tribute there. I think I'll take a moment now to talk about the reading of the film. I said that I had an interpretation of Pet Sematary that explains why it is an intensely personal film for Stephen King. And we might as well go into it now. And that is the idea that you are thrown one sort of allegorical reading of Pet Sematary. You know, the person comes back from war and they're so traumatized they're a different person. But I see something else in it. I see something much more personal. I've highlighted biographical elements, but there's another element, which is Stephen King's own personal life, his own personal problems with addiction. To spell it out, the reading is you've got a family member in the home who isn't themselves. They're still your family member, but they're wrong. They're not behaving right. Even though it's the same body, they're fundamentally transformed internally. They just aren't the same person. It's like a doppelganger. And that is how Stephen King felt when he was suffering, like in the depths of his addiction. He was basically not himself. He was in the home, but he wasn't him. He was wrong. He came back wrong. And that's the same sort of terrifying idea here. Remember back to his definition of the ultimate terror, which was terror when you come home and notice everything you own had been taken away and been replaced by an exact substitute. Stephen King, high and drunk, is not Stephen King the father, and is dangerous, is a threat. That's something he finds terrifying, and that has driven the central horror of Pet Sematary. I'm going to read quickly from his other non-fiction book on writing. By 1985, I had added drug addiction to my alcohol problem, yet I continued to function as a good many substance abusers do on a marginally competent level. I was terrified not to. By then, I had no idea how to live any other life. I hid the drugs I was taking as well as I could, both out of terror, what would happen to me without dope, and out of shame. Skipping a bit. Yet the part of me that writes the stories, the deep part that knew I was an alcoholic as early as 1975, when I wrote The Shining, wouldn't accept that. Silence isn't what that part is about. It began to scream for help in the only way it knew how, through my fiction and through my monsters. In late 1985 and 1986, I wrote Misery, the title quite aptly described my state of mind, in which a writer is held prisoner and tortured by a psychotic nurse. In the spring and summer of 1986, I wrote The Tommyknockers, often working until midnight with my heart running at 130 beats a minute and cotton swabs stuck up my nose to stem the coke-induced bleeding. Tommyknockers is a 40s style science fiction tale in which the writer heroine discovers an alien spacecraft buried in the ground. Blah, blah, blah. What you gave up in exchange was your soul. It was the best metaphor. I'll have to go. These alien creatures got into your head and just started, well, Tommy knocking around in there. What you got was energy and a kind of superficial intelligence. What you gave up in exchange was your soul. It was the best metaphor for drugs and alcohol my tired, overstressed mind could come up with. So he does write that personal side into the story. But now back to the action. I hope you found that interesting. Like, I found that very, indicative of why he finds this so terrifying. This is very honest. This here is one of the most memorable bits of Pet Sematary. This is iconic. How many of you are about to wince? Yeah, I'm right there with you. I watched this. I've just watched this yesterday, and I still winced at that bit. Glorious practical effects. Part of the challenge here that they had to deal with was making toddler Miko Hughes scary. And obviously him taking on 6'5" Fred Gwynn, that's a challenge. But they found a good way to work around it. Now, I could say they cheat a little bit. Fred Gwynn goes around the house and, he's downstairs and a ball gets thrown. And then later, just a few seconds later, Gage is upstairs. But, could he really have been downstairs throwing a ball? Probably not. We are going to see some cheating, some quite blatant cheating around how Gage functions. Try not to let it bother you too much, because the biggest challenge is obviously, how do you make it scary? How do you... I just checked in. Yes, I see people wincing. Good. It's not just me. How do you make a toddler scary? Like, you can make it uncanny, you can make it wrong, but how do you make a toddler a threat? There's something so specific about the fact that he goes with a scalpel as well. He's using his dad's tools. It's because the guilt has to really be connected to Lewis. It's his decision, it's his work. So the fact that then it's more of his work, a scalpel that's used to kill, I think is, again, how many times have I said a nice touch? Now, we're going to see some evidence later of some of the censorship that happened to this film. Oh, hey, it's another cat scare. Which cat do you reckon that was? I think that was probably one that they trained to just be chucked. We're going to see some element there of the censorship. Now, you notice there, Fred Gwynn has an excruciating death. His ankle is cut, his mouth is sliced. Like, these are very sort of tactile, visceral details and pains you can imagine. It's something you haven't seen very often. And then that mouth biting on his throat, it's horrible. You're going to see his body in a few minutes, and you might notice that there are extra injuries that you did not see delivered, and that's because they were censored. In America, to avoid an X rating, they had to cut out some shots of Gage eating Judd's face, and so we lost those. But we'll see the after effects of that in a minute. As I said, the censoring of this all happened on the American side. The British Board of Film Classification did not request any cuts to this film. Now, we're going to be in interesting territory here. Again, how do you deal with making a toddler an actual threat? And this one, they don't cheat so much. We've had it established that there is a strong psychic element here, a classic Stephen King blending of the real and the imagined, and you not being sure which you see. Rachel goes fully into it. So, like, this is her worst trauma being realized. So naturally, she sees Zelda back. It's her worst fear being realized, Zelda here is a bit goblin mode. I'll be honest, it doesn't work for me as well, but there's a much more disturbing bit coming up. We notice Zelda is in the same dress, and then there is young Gage in the same outfit. Now, why is he dressed like that? This could be a kind of a Nam moment, unintentionally funny, but as I've pointed out to you, the painting that you've been shown multiple times is to tie together the trauma of Zelda, that childhood trauma of her sister dying in the most horrible way, hidden away, and then her son dying. And this sort of intercutting helps you focus on the emotional element. I'm a big fan of it. So the fact that you have Gage then wearing the same outfit as in the painting is to tie those elements together. You notice the killing is happening off screen. Probably a sensible choice. And there's an interesting line that that's going to come up here that is classic Stephen King, and I think was also referenced later on. You notice the pieces being kind of put together here. You kind of wonder, why did Lewis not get attacked in the night? I do wonder. I'm going to be paying attention. It looks like it is the next morning, but we'll have to see, is it dark at night afterwards? We're going to have to check that out. It's also harder to make it scary in the daytime. You notice, interestingly, there's a bunch of toys there, and there was a truck, a sort of idea that even though you got little Gage's toys there, you can't separate him from the truck, from the fate. We're going to see the trucks a few more times, by the way. I also don't think I mentioned earlier, but little Miko Hughes, this is really early for him. He goes on over the next couple of years to star in Kindergarten Cop, and in a really interesting role. He's in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which once I recognized him from that, I thought that was really weird. And I'll also just point, so that's 5 years after this, I'll also just point out that he also had an uncredited role in Tropic Thunder, which blows my mind. He was a radio DJ, if you want to look for him there. I'm not trying to be unkind, but sort of a lot of child stars, as they age, don't have a very standard look. Miko Hughes, he's kind of a beefcake now. Anyway, this line here is the one I wanted to talk to you about. Miko Hughes as Gage is delivering the really creepy lines. He's going to say, I played with Judd, then I played with Mommy. And you've got other obvious sinister undertones there. And I guess you would say it's more the horror side of the Stephen King 3 types of horror model. Did you just see that truck go by there? Just again, a reminder. But I think it's that kind of dialogue. I played with Mummy, I want to play with you too. I think that's a dialogue that inspired In the Mouth of Madness, where they have which is full of Stephen King parodies, kind of taking the pee out of him. And they has the creepy kid saying, I want my mummy, it's mommy's day. And I'm afraid we get an absolutely atrocious line here. As I say, Stephen King wrote the script, and you absolutely know it in this one. I hope you caught that, folks. Today is Thanksgiving Day for cats, but only if they came back from the dead. This is why you need an editor. This really is why you need an editor, I'm afraid. By the way, I can assure you that is a prop syringe. The American equivalent of the RSPCA was on set. The cat was actually sedated, but by a vet. The cat was unharmed. and probably quite enjoyed the experiences, I find. That cat will be absolutely high as anything. But yeah, today is Thanksgiving Day for cats, but only if they came back from the dead. This is a kind of change I'm very glad that the remake made. That line is not in there. And I think Mary Lambert, if she was thinking, would probably have cut it. You also notice that, very unfortunately, because Mary Lambert's directing career isn't massive, she's very easily out-Googled by Mary Lambert, the singer. Now, I love this. This makes me think of Silent Hill so much. This is a Silent Hill transformation. This is the dark side of Silent Hill. And well, what I'm saying is, like, Stephen King hasn't taken it from Silent Hill. And I'm not saying Silent Hill takes it from here, but Silent Hill does make an excessive amount of Stephen King references all over the place. So is it possible that they're a little inspired by the Pet Sematary film? Maybe. I really like it though. Let's also note, like, why is this in here? Why did they go to the trouble of making the whole house rotten? Well, think back to Stephen King's 3 Types of Terror, the ultimate type of terror. When you come home, just like he's done now, when you come home and notice everything you own has been taken away and replaced by an exact substitute. It's when the lights go out and you feel something behind you. You hear it, you feel its breath against your ear, but when you turn around, there's nothing there. There we go. I think that's why it's in there. It's the, as you would say in Germany, it's the unheimlich, the uncanny, literally unhomely, I guess, not like your home. It's his home, but it's not his home. It's a twisted version of it. I really love that detail. Now, we are going to encounter some quite egregious cheating here. And how much of it you can forgive, I leave up to you. I think the film is doing so much right that I'm extremely inclined to be charitable. Looking around, you have... you notice the stairs to the attic are gone from when Rachel was in there. And we are now wondering where on earth Judd's body is. We're primed for that. Now, I think the cutting of the ankles is so iconic. The remake does a beautiful job of baiting you, setting you up for the exact same shot, and then it doesn't deliver. It does something cool, but it makes you expect it. Look at the chin eaten away. Yeah. So they had it on the model, but that footage, I'm afraid, was excised, which kind of confuses me because they had to take that out to not get an X certificate, but they were able to reshoot the ending to include much more kind of disgusting gore in the absolute finale, in the very denouement of the story. So Miko Hughes, I think, can be very creepy here. You might have concerns about what he can do, but the alternatives they had, the things the studio were pushing her to do, pushing Mary Lambert to do, was to use either use a dwarf or use a kind of robot, a prop, a doll. And I hope you can agree that both of those would have been absolutely terrible options. I'm very glad they did not go with that. So as awkward as it can be, I'm glad they went with Miko Hughes. And to be fair, I think he does a really solid job. This stuff is going to get disturbing. This is hard to watch. And the fact that they love the intercutting here of live Miko and dead Miko, or I should say Gage. And it really shows the transformation is serious. it's so much more of an achievement in horror. It's so much more horrifying that the struggle isn't physical. He can obviously overpower Gage. It's the fact that he can so easily do it and he still has to take the kid out. He has to really own the decision. This is a nightmare for him. He hasn't been able to face up for it and he's had no escape there. Lewis has had to really not avoid death. He's had to face up to it here and it's absolutely traumatic. It's that much scarier because of how little a threat Miko is. And I think he delivers it very well. Now, of course, having heaped some praise on it, this is flagrant cheating. How does toddler Gage drag his mum all the way up into the attic, get her hung on a rope? He doesn't. They cheated flagrantly for a good jump scare. How much is that going to annoy you? I don't know. Halloween is a masterpiece. It does the exact same thing. You know, you think, well, in there it's more just improbable. Why would Michael Myers go to all the trouble of stringing bodies up so they could fall down from the top frame into shot? Friday the 13th, same thing. Why would the killer in Friday the 13th, to not spoil it, hang a body up in a tree so it could fall down in the exact right moment? He wouldn't. It's just for a cheap scare. So how annoyed you want to get about that is your own business. I can forgive a cheap scare. I'll also note here that they did not actually burn the house. They built a facade around the real house and set fire to that. The houses were just opposite each other. It was a real location they used, inspired by a place Stephen King lived, but they didn't actually burn the house down. The thing is obviously there to echo Frankenstein and to echo the case of, I want to say, Timmy Bateman, the chap who returns dead from World War II and is resurrected. So what's the phrase, guys? It's like poetry. It rhymes. These are cute little details. But of course, the real thing here is that Lewis hasn't learned anything. Now, there's a powerful thing here. There's a powerful thing he says to Victor that I think was underused. Notice a truck again reminding us of death. He says to Victor, he waited too long. The problem with Gage was he waited too long. Now, I think that's a line that Judd should have said. Judd, who knows how wrong it goes when you resurrect, should never have recommended that Church be brought back. But if he was really close, if he had a much stronger motivation to recommend it, say, if Judd had the big theory that actually the real problem was Timmy Bateman had been dead for a week or so, or his dog had been dead for a week or so, and therefore it would work, he might justify it. And then Lewis could use the same logic. Okay, we waited too long. It was 2 days. It was 2 days with Gage, but it'll only be hours with Rachel, so it works. I can do it. If he can hold on to that cope, you can justify it more. I mean, I'm not as bothered with Lewis justifying it because I think this is consistent for him. He does not want to face death. But I do need more to justify Judd doing it. And I think that was an easy fix. This ending is straight from the book, but this is the reshot version. The original one, Rachel was much less decayed. It was less gory. And it was played to be a lot more ambiguous. Stephen King is obviously feeding here on the classic element of the monkey's paw tale. And this just looks amazing. Like, this is excellent gore here. This is Stephen King going for the gross out. But I think he's trying to hit the terror as well. And we are ending on one hell of an image. And folks, that is Pet Sematary. The excellent song from the Ramones is playing out there. as a special favour done for Mary Lambert because she knew the Ramones, and we get it. Every version, well, I say every version, the remake recommissioned their own version of the song because gosh darn, you've got to have it, and it is on my running playlist. But there's also a version, I want to say, by the White Tees. Is that their name? The guys who did Delilah, they recorded it for a film called Frankenweenie. And they're basically, what I'm saying is there is no bad version of this song. It's a great song. I've got about 2 minutes and 44 seconds, 2 minutes 22 seconds to close out here, and then that is the end of Pet Sematary. This was an experience. It turns out I can take fewer notes because gosh darn, it is hard to get through it. There are so many details you want to pick up on in the moment. Maybe I'll say, hey, let's play it on 80% speed. Maybe I'll take some, no, that would be a bad joke. I'll have a lot of coffee. I'll get the old Monster Zero on, and that will help me talk quick enough to cover all the details, all the ridiculous reaches in. But I enjoyed this. I've got to practice this. This is, I'm going to be doing a lot of audio commentaries for the upcoming project, the Last Blockbuster Left, about the history of Blockbuster. And so this was a good practice for me. I enjoyed this. It was a challenge, but I hope you liked it. And, you know, especially Marina, when you see this, I hope you appreciated it too. It was your request, and I hope I did it justice here. I'm now looking at the chat, and so this might be weird, folks. This is a live stream. If you're just using it as an audio commentary, I'm looking at the chat. I just want to see how they liked it. Are we having high scores, folks? Because I rate this highly. I'm going to get one extra detail in here. I'm going to kind of cram this. Why do I need to do this? Was it a lovely person's suggestion? But yes, smash like. Absolutely smash the like. I didn't say this earlier, and I should have. This film is criminally, disgustingly underrated. On the IMDb list of all the rated Stephen King films, this is 22. It's behind 1408. It's behind Everything's Eventual, Hearts in Atlantis. It's behind the little-known one, The Doctor's Case. Have you even heard of The Doctor's Case? Heck no. It's absolutely underrated. IMDb have done it dirty. I hope I've given you reason to love it. Rotten Tomatoes, 60% audience score. Terrible. No. This is a top 5 Stephen King movie. It is one of the best of them. Easily top 5, and I hope I have convinced you on it. It's got some rough bits, but what can you do? I think I've run out of time, and I'm going to probably snip this from the rest of the commentary, but thank you so much for watching. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Okay, folks, probably everything after this I will cut off, but I don't feel a huge amount of pressure because this isn't a standard DVD commentary. You know, it's a bit more relaxed. I hope you forgive me having a little drink now because, my gosh, I've sandpapered my throat doing this. We can relax. This is for true fans. I'll cut this off. Hey, Pero, thank you. I'm glad you liked it. I was so tempted to check the chat throughout, but I've got so many notes on this and I'm just going off and going off. I really hoped you enjoyed it. The Enriab, thank you. Thanks. I really appreciate it. Let's see these scores, by the way. Let's see the scores. 10 out of 12, much appreciated. Yes, Mima. I've got a 9 from Murgoot. I've got 10 out of 12 from Waifu. Yes, behind 1408. Frankly, shocking. I don't even hate 1408. But anyway, we've got voting on Gatsby's behalf, 10 out of 12. Very consistent. Yeah. Victoria, 10 out of 12. Yes, agreed. 12 out of 12. Oof. I mean, it is a great watch. It is quite iconic. It's severely underappreciated. There's a lot to love about it. It's got some cheating elements, but I'm going to be very honest with you. Even though it cheats, it doesn't bother me. If you're into a film you can forgive it. And I think this is something that maybe isn't popular to say. It doesn't fit in with the current commentary idea, like the EFAP, the critical drinker idea, that you can you look at the film objectively on quality. You should. But I think realistically, if we're enjoying it, you can slip a little cheat bias and we're okay with it. So I enjoy this immensely. I think I've seen it maybe 6 times. I had to watch it a whole lot when I was doing the remake. I would recommend the remake. People will tell you it's dull. I would say it is taking out the more kind of chaotic Stephen King elements and adding in, trying to play it a lot straighter and more disturbing. And I think the directors have some ideas in there that make the most of the subject matter. They're very, very different films, but I highly recommend both of them. But this is an absolute treat for me. It's a beautiful, like, late night horror. Let's see. Holy Holy, 11 burgers. Yes, I like it. I think that's fair. I've got a JCDF2, 8. Okay. JCDF2, was that was it the cheating? Was it some of the kind of hokier Stephen King elements? Let me know. I can understand it. Look, if you're really into it, you can forgive anything. You know how I bump Hatchet up just because it has Tony Todd in it. But yeah, I can understand, like, it would annoy you if you catch the lines like, what is that line I loved so much? Today's Thanksgiving Day for cats, but only if they came back from the dead. No, that should have been taken out, man. That should have been taken out. Let's see. And I think Toad out of 12, Joe. Joe, I am so confused, man. What's gone on? I'm a Toad appreciator, but you know, I love all toads and frogs. I appreciate, you know. Okay, yeah, that's fair enough, man. Good to know. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, I think that might be it. I will just yeah, you know, I'm gonna hop on here since you said that, the NREAB. It is something I noticed. I think commentaries is an area that we can really, really fill in on. I think it's something that is pretty underexplored. We can easily do these commentaries, and you know, I'm not the first to do it at all. But it's something I wanted to do. If you watch a lot of commentaries, you do tend to find that, oh gosh, you tend to find a lot of talk of just something that the person found interesting about. The example I'll go to is like meetings, meetings with producers, coming on and off the script. And it's like, or the other one you'll hear a lot is, oh, here's this person. Oh, they were so great to work with. They were so great. They're so great. It's like, you know, at least on Blade Trinity, they had the freedom to say that Wesley Snipes was an asshole, you know? I'm just going to have a quick paranoia. That was Wesley Snipes, right? It's been a long time since I saw those. Help me out, chat. Have I done a hate crime? Wesley Snipes, I knew it. You know, Ryan Reynolds was able to say he's an arsehole, but yeah, a lot of the time in the commentary, you are just going to get, this person was great to work with, blah, blah, blah. Someone was so talented. And it's like, that's nice, but please give us details. You have an inside scoop. And the trouble is, a lot of people doing these commentaries, they're working. They've got to protect their relationships in the industry. And they'll just tell you, like, meetings with producers, this person is amazing, or it was so cold on set that day. I'm thinking of like watching the Descent director's commentary. Drove me mad. So little that informed you about the film, about how it was made, why things were done, things that were included to enhance your understanding, you know? Now, I have just noticed something, and now that I can actually look at chat, I can give appreciation. So Diana, thank you so much for gifting the memberships. I really appreciate it. That's awesome of you. Yeah, that's wonderful. And you know what, folks who've just got their memberships, that's really good timing, because on Tuesday, Mergu and I are recording a bonus stream of additional episodes of Tales of the Unexpected. If you didn't see our stream, go watch it. Honestly, Tales of the Unexpected, absolute surprise hit for me. I love it. I was already binging Twilight Zone. I'm now going to be binging that. I've got my viewing sorted for a long time. And there were so many good episodes that we just had to do a bonus stream. We are absolutely, I mean, when we get to Tales from the Crypt and the Outer Limits, I might just do a month that is divided between those two, or I might come back and do a separate arc just on Tales from the Crypt and one just on the Outer Limits. Because that will be a nightmare to choose from. Anyway, so Diana, you're an absolute star. I hope you've taken a membership yourself, because you deserve it. And yeah, that stream should be out. I also realize I've got a video I should release, which is the video on Terrifier. So we'll try and get on that. Just answering some questions. Am I doing another Stephen King film in the future? Oh, really good question. Yes, absolutely. I know we're doing Creepshow, and we will probably be doing that in, I think it would be, Creepshow would probably be in June. But if you look in my back catalogue, you'll find a load of streams. We've done a stream on Misery. We did a stream on every version of Carrie. I tortured people. I just said, look, watch as much Carrie as you can stand. So we've got the Carrie, and Carrie 2 stream. So there's that. Just check my back catalogue of streams, Pero, and you should find some more Stephen King stuff. And I also have an upcoming video on The Shining and the influence. So there's a sort of interesting way that The Shining basically rejects Stephen King's novel as a source and really adapts the film version of The Haunting. Now, that sounds a bit crazy, but Kubrick really took inspiration from that film. And both Kubrick and King are really interested in the author of that book, whose name I've forgotten. Help me out, folks. Who wrote The Haunting of Hill House? Help me out. I've completely forgotten. She's amazing. I have the book and I can't remember. Am I going to do another commentary? I think I would. I think I would do it. Oh, I also remembered we did, Haven Woods and we did a commentary on Gerald's game that's quite controversial. Sorry? Oh, I don't know how much the mic picked up there, but I've been reminded that Shirley Jackson is the author. So yeah, both Kubrick and King love Shirley Jackson. Dan's Macabre has quite a nice bit on her. So I'll get into it. Any other questions? Was there another question? Oh, here we go. I don't know if you're being tongue-in-cheek about the Lawnmower Man, JCDF2. Absolutely, I can. So I would say my favorite is the 1976 Carrie. The 2013 one completely misunderstood Carrie and mangled it. Avoid at all costs. So 1976 Carrie, I love. Gerald's Game, I love. That's a recent one as well. I think it's 2018. Midnight Mass is really like a Stephen King, but it's not the actual one. I think Storm of the Century is a miniseries that's underappreciated. I really like Creepshow as well, if you like an anthology. I'd say those are really good as well. Let me take a quick look through some of them. Stand By Me is good. The Green Mile is really good. Shawshank Redemption, if you don't need something super focused on horror. The Dead Zone is... Oh, there we go. The Dead Zone and The Mist. I really love The Dead Zone, and The Mist is an amazing adaptation. So hopefully those are some good recommendations for you. And also I talked about The Mist very recently, if you want to see that. Let's have a look. So yes, I said I would do another commentary. Very happy to do that. There we go. And let's see. What's our horror homework? Oh, the NREAB. The horror homework is Return of the Living Dead. So that's going to be on Thursday. If you want to see that, that is Thursday's homework is Return of the Living Dead. That is a very different film to this. But we like a bit of variety. We focused on older anthologies, so we're going for a bit of schlock and fun from Dan O'Bannon. But I think that is probably about it for me. I will probably snip this bit off the end so that people can use this more as a DVD commentary equivalent. But a massive thanks to you. Thanks for being patient. Obviously, I couldn't look at the chat while I was doing this, so thank you for sticking around. You've got your horror homework. I will try and remember to put out the Terrifier video tomorrow, and with that, I think I'm going to end it. This was fun. All right, folks. Have a lovely evening. Have a fantastic weekend. Thanks, y'all. Tschüss.